When you look at a geopolitical map, war looks, I don't know, almost like a board game.
Oh, totally. Very abstract.
Exactly. You have these big sweeping arrows showing troop movements and, little icons representing air bases and these very clean, distinct red and blue lines drawn all across the geography.
Right, which is completely divorced from reality.
Yeah. It really is. Because then you zoom in, you zoom past the arrows, past all the strategic targets, right down to the street level. I mean, to a kitchen in Dnipro, where a grandmother is just trying to feed her cat after a long day at work, and a hypersonic missile hits right outside her window.
It's a terrifying contrast.
It shatters that board game illusion instantly, and that whiplash, like the absolute disconnect between macro-level military strategy and micro-level human reality, that is exactly what we are exploring today.
And we have a lot to get through.
We really do. We're taking a deep dive into a massive stack of sources detailing the intense escalation of long-range and asymmetric warfare between Russia and Ukraine, specifically looking at early June 2026. We are parsing through official addresses from the Ukrainian president, international news reports from the Kyiv Post, Jerusalem Post, Straits Times, Ukrainska Pravda, RBC Ukraine, The Star, and we even have a raw, on-the-ground YouTube testimonial to unpack.
But before we actually dive into the timeline, we need to establish some ground rules for you, the listener.
Yes, very important.
Because the source material we are working with today, it contains highly charged, deeply conflicting political and military claims from both left-wing and right-wing sources. So we must make it absolutely clear that we are never taking a side.
Never.
We are not here to endorse the viewpoints of any government or any military force or any news outlet. Our sole job in this deep dive is to impartially report and, synthesize the ideas exactly as they appear in the original source material.
Right. We just want to give you the mechanics of what these sources are saying so you can understand the full complex picture yourself. So, to start, I was looking at the translated transcripts of President Zelensky's June 1st address in our stack. And he heavily emphasizes the anniversary of something called Operation Spiderweb.
Oh, yeah, that was a major operation.
Right. According to the official address, this was a highly classified operation that resulted in the destruction of 41 Russian strategic aircraft. These were the exact bombers and planes being used to strike deep into Ukraine.
That's a massive number of aircraft.
It is. And he goes on to claim that because of operations like this, there are, quote, no safe roads left for Russian military logistics in the occupied south and east.
Right.
But I'm stuck on the logistics of that claim. I mean, how does a military systematically dismantle 41 strategic aircraft when those planes are actively guarded and parked deep behind enemy lines?
Well, it really comes down to the evolution of asymmetric long-range capabilities.
Okay.
When a military lacks a massive traditional air force to go head-to-head in a dogfight, they have to rely on deep strike drones and really specialized intelligence.
Because they can't just fly a fighter jet in there.
Exactly. Strategic bombers are incredibly expensive, complex machines. But, when they are just parked on a tarmac, they're actually incredibly soft targets.
Oh, that makes sense.
So Operation Spiderweb, as described in these sources, it represents a shift. It's a shift from trying to shoot down an arrow mid-flight to basically walking up to the archer and snapping their bow before they even draw the string.
Oh, wow. Snapping the bow. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, by targeting the airframes right on the ground and hitting the logistical nodes like the roads, the fuel depots, you create this cascading failure.
Because nothing can move.
Right. If the fuel trucks can't safely navigate the occupied territories without being targeted, the front line essentially just freezes.
Which actually brings us to this mind-boggling statistic from the RBC Ukraine reports in our stack.
The refinery numbers, right?
Yes. They detail a systematic campaign targeting Russian oil infrastructure. Between January and May of 2026, Ukrainian forces reportedly struck 15 Russian oil refineries. Yeah, and the sources claim this took nearly 40% of Russia's primary oil refining capacity totally offline. I literally had to read that twice.
That's a staggering figure.
I mean, Russia is geographically massive. It is an energy titan. How does hitting just 15 locations sideline almost half of their entire production capability? Is that, just a strategic exaggeration?
Well, it sounds mathematically impossible until you look at how an oil refinery actually works in practice.
Okay, lay it on me.
A refinery isn't just, a big bucket of oil. It relies on these things called primary distillation columns.
Distillation columns.
Right. These are massive, highly complex, towering structures that physically separate the crude oil into usable fuels. They are essentially the central nervous system of the entire facility.
So you don't have to blow up the whole plant.
Exactly. You don't have to level the entire square footage of a refinery to stop it from working. You just have to punch a hole in that specific distillation column.
Oh, wow.
And furthermore, much of that highly specialized refining equipment was originally built or serviced by Western companies.
Oh, right, because of the sanctions.
Yes. Under the current global sanctions, replacing a custom-built distillation column isn't something you could do overnight by just, ordering a part online.
Yeah, it's not like Amazon Prime.
No, it takes months, sometimes years. So striking 15 key nodes doesn't just cause a temporary fire. It fundamentally bottlenecks the entire national supply chain.
Okay, so let's unpack this for a second. It's like watching a martial artist who realizes they can't match their opponent's raw heavyweight size.
Right. They can't win a standard brawl.
Exactly. So instead of standing there trading punches in the center of the ring, they start targeting the cardiovascular system. They cut off the oxygen, or, well, in this case, the highly refined fuel supply, to paralyze the giant from the inside out.
That's a really good analogy. And what's fascinating here is the sheer economic paradox this creates on the global stage. Well, we are talking about Russia, a country that historically was viewed as the world's premier gas station.
Right.
Yet, as a result of these 15 strikes, the sources note that Russia actually had to ban exports of aviation fuel and gasoline from their own territory.
Wait, they banned their own exports?
Yeah. And they were seriously considering a ban on diesel exports, too, just to keep their own domestic economy running.
That is wild.
Transforming an energy exporter into a country scrambling to hoard its own primary resource is a massive strategic blow. It fractures the economic foundation that actually funds their war effort.
And the sources show that blockade is bleeding into international waters, too. We have reports of France recently intercepting a Russian shadow fleet tanker in the Atlantic.
Yes, the shadow fleet. I hear that term thrown around a lot in these geopolitical articles, but what does that actually mean in practice? Like, how do you hide a massive oil tanker in the middle of the ocean?
It's crazy. But a shadow fleet operates through a highly sophisticated web of obfuscation to bypass international sanctions.
Every legitimate commercial vessel uses an automatic identification system, or AIS, that broadcasts its location, its speed, and identity to avoid collisions.
Right, standard safety stuff.
But shadow fleet tankers often go dark by just turning off their AI transponders. Or, even trickier, they actively spoof the GPS data.
Spoof it, like faking their location.
Exactly, to make it look like they are cruising in the Mediterranean when they are actually loading sanctioned oil in the Baltic Sea.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly deceptive.
And in layers of anonymous shell companies registered in distant jurisdictions and, changing the ship's flag mid-voyage, it becomes incredibly difficult for international authorities to prove where the oil even came from.
If France caught one.
They did. The fact that France intercepted one of these vessels highlights how this localized conflict is forcing international shipping and foreign governments into this global game of maritime cat and mouse.
So if you're systematically choking off the fuel supply and intercepting the covert shipments, the opponent is inevitably going to react. You push, they push back.
Every action has a reaction.
Right. And that brings us to the intense diplomatic and informational reaction we see in the sources. According to Ukrainska Pravda and other outlets, the Russian Foreign Ministry issued a severely worded threat.
And this was a major escalation in rhetoric.
Huge. They announced the beginning of, quote, systematic continuous strikes against Ukrainian defense industries, specifically pointing out drone production sites and decision-making centers in Kyiv.
Right.
They even warned foreigners and diplomatic staff to leave the city immediately. But the stated justification for this massive threat is where things get really murky.
Yeah, the justification is a textbook example of narrative warfare.
So Russia claims this threat of systematic strikes was a direct retaliation for a Ukrainian strike on a college dormitory in Starobilsk, which is in the occupied Luhansk region.
Okay.
The Russian reports claim that strike killed 21 people. But then you flip over to these statements from Ukraine's general staff in our stack, and they vehemently deny hitting any civilian targets.
Complete contradiction.
Total contradiction. They state that the target in Starobilsk was entirely military. Specifically, the headquarters of the Russian Rubicon Special Unit, which they identify as the Center for Advanced Unmanned Technologies.
The drone center.
Exactly. So Ukraine is stressing their strict adherence to international humanitarian law, claiming it was a precision strike on a drone command center. Meanwhile, Russia is broadcasting that it was a brutal massacre of students.
Right.
As someone just reading these news reports over their morning coffee, how are you supposed to navigate a landscape where the exact same physical event is labeled in two completely contradictory ways? I mean, how do intelligence analysts even verify the truth?
I think this actually raises a really important question about the mechanics of modern open source intelligence, or OSINT.
Oh, SINT, right.
Analysts don't just listen to the press releases. They look for digital friction.
Digital friction, what is that?
Well, if a building is struck, analysts will scrape social media for bystander videos to look at the actual nature of the explosion.
Oh, like cell phone footage?
Yeah. Does the explosion look like a single payload detonating? Or are there massive, erratic, secondary explosions that would indicate a stockpile of drone batteries or ammunition cooking off?
Oh, so a dorm wouldn't have secondary explosions.
Exactly. They also analyze satellite imagery to see what kind of vehicles were parked outside the building in the weeks prior, military trucks or civilian cars.
Oh, makes a lot of sense.
But your point about the contradiction is crucial here. Both nations are utilizing these highly polarized narratives not just for domestic morale, but as a mandatory prelude to justify their subsequent military actions.
They are essentially building a rhetorical foundation.
Yes. Establishing a specific narrative, in this case, Russia claiming a civilian dormitory was attacked, provides the diplomatic cover for their stated policy of launching systematic continuous strikes on the capital.
Wow. So the information war paves the runway for the kinetic war.
You hit the nail on the head. You have to
Yeah.
manufacture the justification before you launch the missiles.
And those diplomatic threats of systematic strikes, they didn't remain abstract for very long. They materialized into a devastating physical reality within mere hours.
They move very fast.
And here is where it gets, really interesting when you look at the sheer logistical scale of the retaliation. Overnight on June 2nd, Russia launched a massive multi-city combined assault.
The huge coordination effort.
The Jerusalem Post, Kyiv Post, and others, they outline a synchronized attack utilizing drones, ballistic and hypersonic missiles, and Kalibr cruise missiles launched from the Caspian Sea.
Right, from the Caspian.
You were analyzing the technical breakdown of this launch earlier. What does a combined assault like that actually look like for the air defense operators on the ground?
Honestly, it looks like an overwhelming math problem designed specifically to break human reaction times.
A math problem.
Yeah, because you have to consider the vastly different speeds and trajectories of these weapons. A Shahed-style drone might fly at around 100 miles per hour, relatively low to the ground.
Okay, pretty slow.
But a Kalibr cruise missile is much faster, hugging the terrain. And then a hypersonic missile is traveling at upwards of Mach 5, just plunging from the upper atmosphere.
That's incredibly fast.
Right, so to have all of these different weapons converge on Ukrainian airspace at the exact same time, the launches have to be staggered meticulously.
Oh, I see.
The drones from the north are launched hours earlier, the Kalibrs from the Caspian Sea are launched later, and the hypersonics are launched last.
So they all hit the radar screen at the exact same minute.
Exactly. And the purpose of that synchronization isn't just to hit a building. It is to purposefully overwhelm the radar systems and force the air defense commanders to make impossible choices.
Like deciding what to shoot down.
Yes. Do you use a $1 million interceptor missile on a cheap drone, or do you save it for the incoming ballistic missile? By saturating the airspace with varied threats, you force the defending military to expend their highly valuable, limited supply of air defense interceptors.
And despite those interceptors being used, the impact on the ground on June 2nd was severe.
It was devastating.
The sources detail a very grim reality. In Kyiv, a 24-story apartment building in the Podol district suffered a collapse, with people trapped inside the rubble.
Just awful.
A 9-story building had its roof catch fire. Cars were left burning near a kindergarten in the Obolon district. At least 14 people were injured in the capital. 3 districts lost power entirely, and thousands of people were forced to shelter underground in the metro stations.
And it wasn't just the capital that was hit.
No, not at all. In Dnipro, 4 people were killed and 16 were injured. A 2-story building was partially destroyed, leaving a 73-year-old woman hospitalized in serious condition.
A 73-year-old woman.
Yeah. And in Kharkiv, Strikes hit industrial zones, wounding 6 people, including an 11-year-old girl.
It's heartbreaking.
Now, the sources note that President Zelenskyy had actually warned the public of this exact massive strike based on intelligence reports just a day prior.
Right, they knew it was coming.
But knowing it's coming clearly doesn't stop the devastation. When you look at the stark disconnect here, Russia's diplomatic threat clinically focused on hitting, quote, decision-making centers, versus the reality of pulling a 73-year-old woman and an 11-year-old girl from the rubble of residential apartments, it's jarring.
It really is. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, it reveals the harsh strategic utility behind targeting civilian infrastructure.
Utility? How is there utility in that?
Well, yes, there may be stated military targets, but launching a combined assault of this magnitude, triggering air raid sirens across the entire country in the dead of night, it serves a deliberate psychological purpose.
To scare them.
More than scare. It is designed to relentlessly exhaust the civilian population. Sleep deprivation, the constant cortisol spike of the sirens, the destruction of power grids. These are calculated tactics of attrition.
Just wearing them down.
Exactly. It is about degrading the sheer willpower of the society to continue supporting the war effort.
So what does this all actually mean for you, the listener? To truly grasp the weight of that psychological attrition, we have to zoom all the way in.
Down to the individual level.
Right. We've talked about the strategic maps, the 40% drops in refining capacity, the Mach 5 flight paths. Let's look at the street level.
This is where it gets very real.
In our source stack, we have a transcript from a raw, on-the-ground YouTube channel called APT. It features an interview with a grandmother living in Dnipro.
Yes.
She works as a tram conductor. And reading her account of the June 2nd strike it stops you in your tracks.
It totally strips away all the sterile geopolitical terminology we usually use to describe these events.
Exactly. She describes the strike happening right in the middle of a working day. Not on a fortified battlefield, but in the city center.
Among civilians.
She talks about busy streets, cafeterias, people just going about their normal routines. She had just finished her shift on the tram, come home, fed her cat, and lay down to rest.
Such a mundane, normal day.
Completely normal. She says the first explosion wasn't too bad, but then she actually saw the flash of the second one through her window.
Oh, man.
She described the sound as incredibly loud, physically shaking the building. And she articulates this deeply human feeling of having, quote, nowhere to run.
Which is terrifying.
She says even if you hear the alarms, if the missile is already falling from the sky, where do you actually go?
You can't outrun it.
No. She describes herself and her cat trembling in the aftermath, stepping out of her house to see a car completely engulfed in flames right outside her front gate. She called it a nightmare with no words to convey.
No words to convey, that says it all.
To me, it's the surreal juxtaposition that is so hard to process. On one hand, you have the grand, sweeping strategy of Operation Spiderweb and the global economic blockade of oil.
The big board game.
Right. And on the other hand, you have a woman just trying to feed her cat after a shift on the tram, and those two vastly different worlds violently collide.
It's sobering. And if we, connect this back to the bigger picture of our discussion today, her account highlights the almost unimaginable resilience required to simply exist under these conditions.
Just to get through the day.
Exactly. While military analysts debate logistics networks and the synchronization of Caspian Sea launches, the ultimate undeniable friction of this conflict is absorbed by civilians.
The people on the ground.
These are everyday people who have mere seconds to react to complex weapons systems fired from hundreds of miles away.
That's it.
It forces anyone analyzing this conflict to recognize that the cost of asymmetric warfare isn't just measured in destroyed refineries or downed aircraft. It is measured in the shattered daily routines of millions of ordinary people.
It really puts everything into a sobering perspective. So let's bring it all back to the surface and summarize the journey we've taken through these sources today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We started at the macro-level strategic heights, examining how Ukraine utilized asymmetric long-range drone strikes to dismantle strategic aviation and systematically cripple 40% of Russia's primary oil refining capacity.
By targeting those vital distillation columns.
Right. And we explored how that economic strangulation triggered a shadow fleet game of cat and mouse on the global oceans.
With ships spoofing their AI's data.
Then we navigated the incredibly murky waters of informational warfare, looking at how the strike in Starobilsk was utilized to diplomatically justify massive retaliation.
The rhetorical runway.
The rhetorical runway, exactly. And finally, we witnessed the terrifying physical reality of that escalation on June 2nd, moving from the mathematical synchronization of cruise missiles down to the lived nightmare of a grandmother in Dnipro.
The human cost.
Yes.
Yeah.
So why does all of this matter to you? Why should you care about the mechanics of an oil refinery or the speed of a Calibra missile?
It's a fair question.
Because this deep dive illustrates how the highly abstract concepts of global energy economics, military deterrence, and international diplomacy ultimately dictate the daily survival of ordinary people.
They are completely intertwined.
The decisions made in classified rooms directly determine whether an 11-year-old girl in Kharkiv or a 73-year-old woman in Dnipro gets to see tomorrow.
And that leads to a final thought I want to leave you with. Something for you to mull over that builds on everything we've unpacked today.
What's that?
Well, as warfare becomes increasingly reliant on uncrewed, automated technology, whether it is the advanced drones produced by the Rubicon unit, the algorithmic flight paths of long-range interceptors, or just deep strike capabilities targeting infrastructure, the decision-makers are becoming geographically and psychologically further removed from the actual kinetic battlefield.
They're watching it on screen.
Exactly. Yet, as the devastated apartment blocks in Kyiv and the burning cars in Dnipro clearly demonstrate, the civilians remain completely physically exposed to the devastating reality of these digital age weapons.
They are the ones feeling the impact.
Right. So the next time you look at that geopolitical map with its clean, sterile arrows and abstract borders, ask yourself, as the weapons become more remote and the warfare more asymmetric, where does accountability truly lie when the trigger is pulled from a continent away, but the casualties are right next door?